Hello and good morning, everyone. We are picking back up with Fahrenheit 451 today. I think we might finish it today, question mark, maybe, we'll see. So we've been reading Fahrenheit over the past few weeks. We're in chapter 3 of 3. Hi. And it's getting down to the wire. So Guy Montag is a fireman. He sets fires to places, specifically people's houses who own books, because books have been outlawed at this point. Nobody really reads anymore. As an English teacher, you can see why this would be a bother to me. But in the course of his job, he has decided, hey, why are we burning all these things? What's so important about them anyways? And has started reading books. Now, that sets him down a slippery slope of a path to, losing his job, losing his wife, burning down his own home, killing his boss, and being on the run from the law now. It's really fun. So where we left off, Montag is trying to escape the law, and he is running towards the river. He was 300 yards downstream when the hound reached the river. Overhead, the great racketing fans of the helicopters hovered. A storm of light fell upon the river, and Montag dived under the great illumination as if the sun had broken the clouds. He felt the river pull him further on its way into darkness. Then the lights switched back to the land. The helicopters swerved over the city again, as if they had picked up another trail. They were gone. The hound was gone. Now there was only the cold river and Montag floating in a sudden peacefulness, away from the city and the lights and the chase, away from everything. He felt as if he had left a stage behind and many actors. He felt as if he had left the great seance and all the murmuring ghosts. He was moving from an unreality that was frightening into a reality that was unreal because it was new. The black land slid by, and he was going into the country among the hills. For the first time in a dozen years, the stars were coming out above him in great processions of wheeling fire. He saw a great juggernaut of stars form in the sky and threaten to roll over and crush him. He floated on his back when the Ville filled and sank. The river was mild and leisurely, going away from the people who ate shadows for breakfast and steam for lunch and vapors for supper. The river was very real. It held him comfortably and gave him the time at last, the leisure, to consider this month, this year, and a lifetime of years. He listened to his heart slow. His thoughts stopped rushing with his blood. He saw the moon low in the sky now. The moon there, and the light of the moon, caused by what? By the sun, of course. And what lights the sun? Its own fire. And the sun goes on, day after day, burning and burning. The sun and time. The sun and time and burning. Burning. The river bobbed him along gently, burning. The sun and every clock on the earth, it all came together and became a single thing in his mind. After a long time of floating on the land and a short time of floating in the river, he knew why he must never burn again in his life. The sun burned every day. It burned time. The world rushed in a circle, turned on its axis, and time was busy burning the years and the people anyway, without any help from him. So if he burned things along with the firemen and the sun burned time, that meant that everything burned. One of them had to stop burning. The sun wouldn't, certainly. So it looked as if it had to be Montag and the people he had worked with until a few short hours ago. Somewhere the saving and putting away had to begin again, and someone had to do the saving and keeping, one way or another, in books, in records, in people's heads, any way at all, as long as it was safe, free from moths, silverfish, rust and dry rot, and men with matches. The world was full of burning of all types and sizes. Now the guilt of the asbestos weaver must open shop very soon. He felt his heel bump land, touch pebbles and rocks, scrape sand. The river had moved him towards shore. He looked in at a great black creature without eyes or light, without shape, with only a size that went 1,000 miles, without wanting to stop, with its grass hills and forests that were waiting for him. He hesitated to leave the comforting flow of the water. He expected the hound there. Suddenly the trees might blow under a great wind of helicopters. But there was only the normal autumn wind high up, going by like another river. Why wasn't the hound running? Why had the search veered inland? Montag listened. Nothing. Nothing. Millie, he thought. All this country here, listen to it. Nothing and nothing. So much silence, Millie. I wonder how you'd take it. Would you shout, shut up, shut up? Millie, Millie. And he was sad. Millie was not here, and the hound was not here, but the dry smell of hay blowing from some distant field put Montag on the land. He remembered a farm he had visited when he was young, one of the rare few times he discovered that somewhere behind the 7 veils of unreality, beyond the walls of parlors and beyond the tin moat of the city, cows chewed grass and pigs sat in warm ponds at noon, and dogs barked after white sheep on a hill. Now the smell of dry hay, the motion of the waters, made him think of sleeping in fresh hay in a lonely barn away from the loud highways, behind a quiet farmhouse and under an ancient windmill that whirred like 1,000 of the passing years overhead. He lay in the high barn loft all night, listening to the distant animals and insects and trees, the little motions and stirrings. During the night, he thought, below the loft, he would hear a sound like feet moving, perhaps. He would tense and sit up. The sound would move away. He would lie back and look out the loft window very late in the night and see the lights go out in the farmhouse itself until a very young and beautiful woman would sit in an unlit window, braiding her hair. It would be hard to see her, but her face would be like the face of a girl so long ago in his past now, so very long ago. The girl who had known the weather and never been burned by the fireflies. The girl who had known what dandelions meant rubbed off on your chin. Then she would be gone from the warm window and appear again upstairs in her moonlightened room. And then, to the sound of death, the sound of jets cutting into the sky in 2 black pieces beyond the horizon, he would lie in the loft, hidden and safe, watching those strange new stars over the rim of the earth, fleeing from the soft color of dawn. In the morning, he would not have needed sleep, for all the warm odors and sights of a complete country night would have rested and slept him while his eyes were wide and his mouth, when he thought to test it, was half a smile. And there, at the bottom of the hayloft stair, waiting for him, would be the incredible thing. He would step carefully down in the pink light of early morning, so fully aware of the world that he would be afraid and stand over the small miracle and at last bend to touch it. A cool glass of fresh milk and a few apples and pears laid at the foot of the steps. This was all he wanted now, some sign that the immense world would accept him and give him the long time he needed to think of all the things that might be. A glass of milk, an apple, a pear. He stepped from the river. The land rushed at him, a tidal wave. He was crushed by darkness and the look of the country and the million odors on a wind that iced his body. He fell back under the breaking curve of darkness and sound and smell, his ears roaring. He whirled. The stars poured over his sight like flaming meteors. I gotta sneeze. Yeah, sorry about that. The stars poured over his sight like flaming meteors. He wanted to plunge in the river again and let it idle him safely down on somewhere. The dark land rising was like that day in his childhood, swimming, when from nowhere the largest wave in the history of remembering slammed him down in salt mud and green darkness, water burning his mouth and nose, retching his stomach, screaming, too much water, too much land. Out of the black wall before him, a whisper, a shape. In the shape, 2 eyes. The night looking at him, the forest seeing him, the hound. After all the running and rushing and sweating it out and half drowning, to come this far, work this hard, and think yourself safe with a sigh of relief, and to come out on the land and at last only to find the hound. Montag gave one last agonized shout as if this were too much for any man. The shape exploded away, the eyes vanished. The leaf piles flew up in a dry shower. Montag was alone in the wilderness. A deer. He smelled the heavy musk like perfume mingled with blood and the gummed exhalation of the animal's breath, all cardamom and moss and ragweed odor in this huge night where the trees ran at him, pulled away to the pulse of the heart behind his eyes. There must have been a billion leaves on the land. He waded in them, a dry river smelling of hot cloves and warm dust, and all the other smells. There was a smell like a cut potato from the land, raw and cold and white from having the moon on it most of the night. There was a smell like pickles from a bottle and a smell like parsley on the table at home. There was a faint yellow odor like mustard from a jar. There was a smell like carnations from the yard next door. He put down his hand and felt a weed rise up like a child brushing him. His fingers smelled of licorice. He stood breathing, and the more he breathed the land in, the more he was filled up with all the details of the land. He was not empty. There was more than enough here to fill him. There would always be more than enough. He walked in the shallow tide of leaves, stumbling, and in the middle of the strangeness, a familiarity. His foot hit something that rang dully. He moved his hand on the ground, a yard this way, a yard that. The railroad track. The track that came out of the city and rusted across the land, through forests and woods, deserted by now, by the river. Here was the path to wherever he was going. Here was the single familiar thing, the magic charm he might need to walk a little while, to touch, to feel beneath his feet, as he moved on in the bramble bushes and the lakes of smelling and feeling and touching, among the whispers and the blowing down of leaves. He walked on the track. And he was surprised to learn how certain he suddenly was of a single fact he could not prove. Once, long ago, Clarice had walked here, where he was walking now. Half an hour later, cold and moving carefully on the tracks, fully aware of his entire body, his face, his mouth, his eyes stuffed with blackness, his ears stuffed with sound, his legs prickled with burrs and nettles, he saw the fire ahead. The fire was gone, then back again like a winking eye. He stopped, afraid he might blow the fire out with a single breath. But the fire was there, and he approached it warily from a long way off. It took the better part of 15 minutes before he drew very close indeed to it, and then he stood looking at it from cover. That small motion, the white and red color, a strange fire because it meant a different thing to him. It was not burning. It was warming. He saw many hands held to its warmth, hands without arms, hidden in the darkness. Above the hands, motionless faces that were only moved and tossed and flickered with firelight. He hadn't known fire could look this way. He had never thought in his life that it could give as well as it could take. Even its smell was different. How long he stood he did not know, but there was a foolish and yet delicious sense of knowing himself as an animal come from the forest, drawn by the fire. He was a thing of brush and liquid eye, of fur and muzzle and hoof. He was a thing of horn and blood that would smell like autumn if you bled it out on the ground. He stood a long, long time, listening to the warm crackle of the flames. There was a silence gathered all about that fire, and the silence was in the men's faces, and time was there, enough time to sit by this rusting track under the tree and look at the world and turn it over with the eyes, as if it were held to the center of the bonfire, a piece of steel these men were all shaping. It was not only the fire that was different, it was the silence. Montag moved towards this special silence that was concerned with all of the world. And then the voices began, and they were talking, and he could hear nothing of what the voices said, but the sound rose and fell quietly, and the voices were turning the world over and looking at it. The voices knew the land, the trees, and the city which lay down the track by the river. The voices talked of everything, and there was nothing they could not talk about, he knew, from the very cadence and motion and continual stir of curiosity and wonder in them. And then one of the men looked up and saw him, for the first or perhaps the 7th time, and a voice called out to Montag, "All right, you can come on out now." Montag stepped back in the shadows. "It's all right," the voice said. "You're welcome here." Montag walked slowly towards the fire and the 5 old men sitting there, dressed in dark blue denim pants and jackets and dark blue shirts. He did not know what to say to them. "Sit down," said the man, who seemed to be the leader of the small group. "Have some coffee?" He watched the dark steaming mixture pour into a collapsible tin cup, which was then handed to him straight off. He sipped at it gingerly and felt them looking at him with curiosity. His lips were scalded, but that was good. The faces around him were bearded, but the beards were neat, clean, and their hands were clean. They had stood up as if to welcome a guest, and now they sat down again. Montag sipped. Thanks, he said. Thanks very much. You're welcome, Montag. My name's Granger. He held out a small bottle of colorless fluid. Drink this too. It'll change the chemical index of your perspiration. Half an hour from now, you'll smell like two other people. With the hound after you, the best thing is bottoms up. Montag drank the bitter fluid. You'll stink like a bobcat, but that's all right. You know my name, said Montag. Granger nodded to a portable battery TV set by the fire. We've watched the chase. Figured you'd wind up south along the river. When we heard you plunging around out in the forest like a drunken elk, we didn't hide as we usually do. We figured you were in the river when the helicopter cameras swung back in over the city. Something funny there. The chase is still running. The other way, though. The other way? Let's have a look. Granger snapped the portable viewer on. The picture was a nightmare, condensed, easily passed from hand to hand in the forest, all whirring color and flight. A voice cried. The chase continues north in the city. Police helicopters are converging on Avenues 87 and Elm Grove Park. Granger nodded. They're faking. You threw them off at the river. They can't admit it. They know they can hold their audience only so long. The show's got to have a snap ending, quick. If they started searching the whole damn river, it might take all night. So they're sniffing for a scapegoat to end things with a bang. Watch. They'll catch Montag in the next 5 minutes. But how? Watch. The camera, hovering in the belly of a helicopter, now swung down at an empty street. See that? Whispered Granger. It'll be you. Right up at the end of that street is our victim. See how the camera's coming in, building the scene? Suspense. Long shot. Right now, some poor fellow is out for a walk. A rarity. An odd one. Don't think the police don't know the habits of queer ducks like that. Men who walk mornings for the hell of it. Or for reasons of insomnia. Anyway, the police have had him charted for months. Years. Never know when that sort of information might be handy. And today, it turns out, it's very usable indeed. It saves face. Oh, God, look there. The men at the fire bent forward. On the screen, a man turned the corner. The mechanical hound rushed forward into the viewer suddenly. The helicopter lights shot down a dozen brilliant pillars and built a cage all around the man. There's Montag, a voice cried. The search is done. The innocent man stood bewildered, a cigarette burning in his hand. He stared at the hound, not knowing what it was. He probably never knew. He glanced at the sky and the wailing sirens. The camera rushed down. The hound leapt up into the air with a rhythm and a sense of timing that was incredibly beautiful. Its needle shot out. It was suspended, for a moment, in their gaze, as if to give the vast audience time to appreciate everything. The raw look on the victim's face, the empty street, the steel animal, a bullet nosing the target. Montag, don't move, said a voice from the sky. The camera fell upon the victim, even as did the hound. Both reached him simultaneously. The victim was seized by the hound and camera in its great spidering, clenching grip. He screamed. He screamed. He screamed! Blackout. Silence. Darkness. Montag cried out in the silence and turned away. Silence. And then, after a time of the men sitting around the fire, their faces expressionless, an announcer on the dark screen said, The search is over. Montag is dead. A crime against society has been avenged. Darkness. We now take you to the sky room of the Hotel Lux for a half hour of Just Before Dawn, a program of... Granger turned it off. They didn't show the man's face in focus. Did you notice? Even your best friends couldn't tell if it was you. They scrambled it just enough to let the imagination take over. Hell, he whispered. Hell. Montag said nothing, but now, looking back, sat with his eyes fixed on the black screen, trembling. Granger touched Montag's arm. Welcome back from the dead. Montag nodded. Granger went on. You might as well know all of us now. This is Fred Clement, former occupant of the Thomas Hardy Chair at Cambridge in the years before it became an atomic engineering school. This other is Dr. Simmons from UCLA, a specialist in Ortega-y-Gasset. Professor West here did quite a bit for ethics, an ancient study now, for Columbia University quite some years ago. Reverend Pat over here gave a few lectures 30 years ago and lost his flock between one Sunday and the next for his views. He's been bumming with us for some time now. Myself, I wrote a book called The Fingers in the Glove, The Proper Relationship Between the Individual and Society. And here I am. Welcome, Montag. I don't belong with you, said Montag at last slowly. I've been an idiot all the way. We're used to that. We all made the right kind of mistakes, or else we wouldn't be here. When we were separate individuals, all we had was rage. I struck a fireman when he came to burn my library years ago, and I've been running ever since. You want to join us, Montag? Yes. What have you to offer? Nothing. I thought I had a part of the book of Ecclesiastes and maybe a little of Revelation, but I haven't even that now. The book of Ecclesiastes would be fine. Where is it? Here. Montag touched his head. Ah, Granger smiled and nodded. What's wrong? Isn't that all right? Said Montag. Better than all right. Perfect. Granger turned to the Reverend. Do we have a book of Ecclesiastes? One. A man named Harris in Youngtown. Montag. Granger took Montag's shoulder firmly. Walk carefully. Guard your health. If anything should happen to Harris, you are the book of Ecclesiastes. See how important you've become in the last minute? But I've forgotten. No, nothing's ever lost. We have ways to shake down your clinkers for you. But I've tried to remember. Don't try. It'll come when we need it. All of us have photographic memories, but spend a lifetime learning how to block off the things that are really in there. Simmons here has worked on it for 20 years, and now we've got the method down to where we can recall anything that's been read once. Would you like someday, Montag, to read Plato's Republic? Of course. I am Plato's Republic. Like to read Marcus Aurelius? Mr. Simmons is Marcus. How do you do? Said Mr. Simmons. Hello, said Montag. I want you to meet Jonathan Swift, the author of that evil political book, Gulliver's Travels. And this other fellow is Charles Darwin, and this one is Schopenhauer, and this one is Einstein, and this one here at my elbow is Mr. Albert Schweitzer, a very kind philosopher indeed. Here we all are, Montag. Aristophanes and Mahatma Gandhi and Gautama Buddha and Confucius and Thomas Love Peacock and Thomas Jefferson and Mr. Lincoln, if you please. We're also Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Everyone laughed quietly. It can't be, said Montag. It is, replied Granger, smiling. We're book burners, too. We read the books and burnt them, afraid they'd be found. Microfilming didn't pay off. We were always traveling. We didn't want to bury the film and come back later. Always the chance of discovery. Better to keep it in the old heads where no one can see it or suspect it. We are all the bits and pieces of history and literature and international law, Byron, Tom Paine, Machiavelli, or Christ. It's here. And the hour's late and the war's begun. And we are out here, and the city is there, all wrapped up in its own coat of 1,000 colors. What do you think, Montag? I think I was blind trying to go at things my own way, planting books in firemen's houses and sending in alarms. You did what you had to do. Carried out on a national scale, it might have worked beautifully. But our way is simpler and, we think, better. All we want to do is keep the knowledge we think we will need intact and safe. We're not out to incite or anger anyone yet, for if we are destroyed, the knowledge is dead, perhaps for good. We are model citizens in our own special way. We walk the old tracks, we lie in the hills at night, and the city people let us be. We're stopped and searched occasionally, but there's nothing on our persons to incriminate us. The organization is flexible, very loose, and fragmentary. Some of us have had plastic surgery on our faces and fingerprints. Right now, we have a horrible job. We're waiting for the war to begin and, as quickly, end. It's not pleasant, but then we're not in control. We're the odd minority crying in the wilderness. When the war's over, perhaps we can be of some use to the world. Do you really think they'll listen then? If not, we'll just have to wait. We'll pass the books on to our children by word of mouth and let our children wait in turn on the other people. A lot will be lost that way, of course, but you can't make people listen. They have to come around in their own time, wondering what happened and why the world blew up under them. It can't last. How many of you are there? Thousands on the roads, the abandoned train tracks tonight, bums on the outside, libraries inside. It wasn't planned at first. Each man had a book he wanted to remember and did. Then, over a period of 20 years or so, we met each other traveling and got the loose network together and set out a plan. The most important single thing we had to pound into ourselves is that we were not important. We mustn't be pedants. We were not to feel superior to anyone else in the world. We're nothing more than dust jackets for books, of no significance otherwise. Some of us live in small towns. Chapter 1 of Thoreau's Walden in Green River, Chapter 2 in Willow Farm, Maine. Why, there's one town in Maryland, only 27 people. No bomb will ever touch that town. It's the complete essays of a man named Bertrand Russell. Pick up that town, almost, and flip the pages. So many pages to a person, and when the war's over, someday, some year, the books can be rewritten again. The people will be called in, one by one, to recite what they know, and we'll set it up in type until another dark age, when we might have to do the whole damn thing over again. But that's the wonderful thing about man. He never gets so discouraged or disgusted that he gives up on doing it all over again, because he knows very well it is important and worth the doing. "What do we do tonight?" asked Montag. "Wait," said Granger, and moved downstream just a little ways, just in case. He began throwing dust and dirt in the fire. The other men helped, and Montag helped, and there in the wilderness, the men all moved their hands, putting out the fire together. So, it's about that time. I think we're going to call it for today and move this into a part 4 and finish up Fahrenheit on Thursday. I'll see you guys then. Be safe, make good choices. Don't get serial killed. Remember to wash your hands. I'll see you soon. Bye.